You're watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Earlier this week, Republican Congressman Rodney Davis announced he would not run for governor, instead seeking a sixth term to re-election in Congress. He joins us now to help elaborate on that decision. Congressman Davis, good to have you back with us. Why not run for governor?
You know, Mark, I was abundantly clear to anyone who asked, including you, what my preference was. My preference was to run for re-election here in Congress. I'd love to be the chair in the next Congress of the House Administration Committee to really fix what I believe have been egregious errors by the Democrats here in Washington. And, you know, eventually I'd like to chair the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee when that opportunity arises in a few terms. This is not a surprise to anyone, although, as I also said, my political battlefield was not set by me. It was going to be set by Democrats in the building that you're in right now, in the state capitol. And
you did have a number of options, though, from that. You could have actually run in the 13th, which carved out your home district, but you still could have opted to run there. Why do you feel the Illinois GOP and you running somewhere else is effectively surrendering that seat to Nikki Budzinski?
Now, number one, I'm not running somewhere else. I run where I live. My house is in the new 15th district, and I will always run for an office in an area I live in. The citizens of Christian County and the voters of Christian County have given me overwhelming support and have been, you know, could have been the difference maker in a few close elections already. I believe I owe it to my closest friends and neighbors to run in the district that I live in. We are not going to surrender what is considered the new 13th district to any Democrat. As a matter of fact, we're working every day to get good qualified candidates to run in these districts against incumbent Democrats and in the two open seats to make sure that Republicans will build a majority that I look forward to serving in as the chair of the House Administration Committee, and at the same time winning seats in Illinois that Democrats who drew this gerrymandered mess certainly don't expect.
You mentioned that you want to run where you live. We don't know what Congresswoman Mary Miller plans to do after her first term is up. If she were to run where she lives now, she'd run against your colleague, Mike Bost. She might choose to run against you instead.
Well, that's a question you'd have to ask my colleagues. I can only attest to what I'm going to do. And we made it abundantly clear, this new district of the 15th district that I live in, as the only incumbent Republican who lives in this district, it's a district I'm very familiar with. It's an area in northwestern Illinois that I have traveled in throughout my time in Congress, working with my colleagues who represent that area, but also even before my time in Congress. So we're blessed to have the support of almost every single Republican county chairman in this district, and also 15 state legislators. And we're building on that support every single day.
That big endorsement list looked a lot like a shot across the bow, a warning sign, marking your territory, saying, Congresswoman Miller, if you want to run here, fine. But these guys are in my corner. I've got the big bag of endorsements here. Have you spoken to her about her plans, about your plans? Did you have any contact with Congresswoman Miller before announcing your plans to run?
Now, I announced my plans based upon the fact that this is a district that I live in, and this is a district that I'm the only incumbent Republican who lives there.
But have you spoken to her?
I have not spoken to Mary or any of my colleagues about my decision to announce, other than the fact that I was going to announce that I was running in this district.
All right, well, we've gotten past the biggest news, I suppose, is that you're running for re-election to Congress. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the recent events there on Capitol Hill. I've interviewed you now for nearly 5 years, so roughly half of your time in Congress.
Feels like 20.
Feels like 20. And in doing that, you become familiar with a politician, almost to the point, if you'll allow me to say, I feel like I'm pretty comfortable. I can almost confidently predict your answers. You get a feel for how a person views politics and views the issues of the day. But I got to tell you, I've racked my brain and I can't think of any explanation. I truly don't know how you're going to answer this question. You've presented yourself to your voters as Mr. Bipartisan, one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. You often repeat that, and you also say that you are a major proponent of infrastructure. How do you explain voting against the bipartisan infrastructure bill that Mitch McConnell voted for, that Lindsey Graham voted for. Why did you vote against it?
Because it was a much different bill and a much different time when it was in the Senate as a standalone. It was pretty clear when the moderate Democrats that I serve with here in the House decided to sign a letter stating that they will vote for the Build Back Broke program that passed the House just a few weeks ago. And at the urging of getting the progressive far left Democrats to vote for the infrastructure package.
Well, you're saying you didn't vote for one piece of legislation because of another unrelated one?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Once it gets tied, once a piece of legislation can get tied to the passage of another piece of legislation that will be devastating for the state of Illinois, devastating for our economy, and devastating for families, absolutely I'll make that consideration when I cast a vote.
But it wasn't tied to it in any. There's no proper tie at all. They're two separate pieces of legislation. You have one that includes funding for roads, bridges, broadband, water pipes. I mean, these are things that you've voted for your entire career, and here you are voting against them.
Mark, you clearly know that when it comes time for votes to be scheduled and votes to be cast, there can be separate votes like the one in the Senate, or there can be votes that are intricately tied together through weeks and weeks, and in this case, months of negotiation amongst the far left Democrats and the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. There were some good things in that infrastructure bill. As a matter of fact, my One Federal Decision Act amendment that was placed in it in the Senate will allow for projects to be done much more quickly and much more cost effectively. But in the end, the sheer fact that the Democrats negotiated amongst themselves to tie votes from the far left progressives for the infrastructure bill to votes from the moderate Democrats for this Build Back Broke $1.75 trillion package that's going to devastate our economy and do nothing about inflation. They were all tied together. And I'm frustrated by that. Have separate votes. Don't tie them together. And don't make people walk a plank to sign a letter stating, I want this infrastructure package, a la the moderate Democrats said they wanted. And we'll sign on to this Build Back Broke program and commit to you in writing. I hope they didn't have to sign it with blood, but they tied them together. And it was shown during the one vote just a week later in the House for the Build Back Broke program, when only one moderate Democrat voted against it, and that was Jared Golden. Every other one voted for spending more on tax increases, more on Green New Deal policies that are going to bankrupt our economy than they did on their number one priority of infrastructure.
The president's administration says that those tax increases are on people who make more than $400,000 a year.
No, it's just like the administration says this bill is paid for, when the Congressional Budget Office clearly says it's not. It's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars, as the CBO laid out. These tax increases are not going to just go to the ultra wealthy in this country. They're going to actually impact our companies, our small businesses, who, again, in one case, I had a small business tell me they did a calculation for themselves, and they're going to be paying 7% more in taxes than what they were paying before the Trump tax cuts that I helped shepherd through and help pass just a few years ago.
If the Senate approves the Human Infrastructure Social Spending Plan, that was their estimate?
That was their estimate on the tax provisions that were laid out initially. Absolutely.
Again, I just don't know how we can. It seems inconsistent to say I'm not going to vote for this piece of legislation because there's this separate one that may or may not pass the Senate someday in the future. I mean, why not vote on the bill that's in front of you?
Oh, Mark, you know better than that. These things were.
I don't. I don't know better than that.
You do know better than that. You've been talking to me for 9 years. Go look back at the negotiations the Democrats put forth leading up to that vote, and you can see why there were very few Republicans that are supportive of infrastructure investment that are going to, that supported that bill. But let's also keep in mind, let's go into the infrastructure bill, mind you. If you look at what we've done in a bipartisan way over the last year during the COVID environment, when we passed infrastructure spending as part of our COVID relief bills, when you look at transit funding, you look at airport funding, for example, what we gave in a bipartisan way to our transit agencies and to our airports is in some cases up to 9 times more on an annual basis than what this infrastructure bill is going to do for those two parts of America's infrastructure programs over the next 5 years. So we've already worked hard to address many of the issues that the Democrats are trying to address over a 5-year time period, investing less. So bipartisanship for infrastructure investment worked when we were doing COVID relief bills, but all of a sudden it becomes intertwined and much more partisan. I have no problem talking about voting against this bill because of how it was laid out and really what it entailed.
The last time you were on this program, this vote was still being scheduled and we didn't know. We asked you, will you vote for it? You said the devil will be in the details, but you want to look at it, and you supported most of the things that were in the bipartisan infrastructure. You sort of severed off the human infrastructure part of it. Since then, Congresswoman Spanberger, one of your colleagues, said we expected 50 to 60 House Republicans to vote for this. In fact, that was the count. In the meantime, since the last time you were on this program and now, former President Trump came out and said to Republicans, don't vote for this infrastructure bill. It will hand Democrats a win. It will be optically good for Democrats going into the midterms. Don't keep Nancy Pelosi in power. Vote against this thing. Did that influence your decision?
Well, I'm glad President Trump laid out what his opinion was. Absolutely. He deserves to have his voice heard when it comes.
But that would be putting politics over the country's infrastructure.
Oh, come on, Mark. We're not sacrificing the country's infrastructure by voting against a bill that even my colleague, Abigail Spanberger, she decided to sign a letter and vote for the Build Back Broke program that's spending $1.75 trillion over the next few years. That's going to do nothing about addressing our inflationary crisis. It's going to exacerbate our border crisis. It's going to not deal with the violent crime crisis that we see in our communities. These are issues that the American people care about. These are issues that President Trump cares about. These are issues I care about. These are the things I'm going to continue to talk about when I look to continue to serve in Congress also.
Did pressure from President Trump influence your decision to vote against the infrastructure bill?
No, I get calls from constituents that will tell me to vote for or against a bill on a regular basis, and I take every single comment into consideration.
Including that one from the former president.
I didn't get a call from former President Trump before I cast my vote. I made my decision based upon what was happening at the time, and if you look back to obvious public reports, you can see that these two bills were intricately intertwined together by the Democrats in Washington, that if you don't pass one, you don't get the other, and vice versa.
I guess you're trusting the word of Senate Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema there. I mean, I don't. It just sounds like Washington D.C. games, frankly.
No, it sounds to me like the line of questioning is more of the media games. I mean, at the same time, Mark, you and I both know there are plenty of things that happen in that state capitol, plenty of things that happen out here through negotiations in Washington, D.C., where bills get intertwined with each other. And to act like that's not the case in this one instance is not fair at all.
All right. Very interesting. Who should run? Do you see any winners in the current field of Republican candidates for governor right now?
I'm excited to have a Republican governor in the governor's mansion. I think we will have a Republican nominee. I don't know who that's going to be, but we're going to have a Republican nominee that may come out of the current crop of candidates, may not. I don't know who else may jump in. But at the same time, I look forward to campaigning with him or her and making sure that we get J.B. Pritzker out of the governor's mansion. He broke his promise on something as simple as legislative maps. He said when he was campaigning for that job, he would never sign a legislatively drawn map. Well, he swung and missed 3 times already. He did it twice with the state legislative maps, and he did it with these gerrymandered congressional maps. And Democrats in Springfield, they don't even hide their gerrymandering. Go look at the maps. I hope you post it up on the screen during this interview. Go see what the Democrats in Springfield just so brazenly do, and then watch J.B. Pritzker break his promise.
They scored an F from the Princeton Review of Gerrymandering Project. They scored an F in competitiveness. They were very tilted toward partisan advantage, and Governor Pritzker did promise he would not sign legislatively drawn maps for the State House. He didn't make that promise for the congressional maps, but for the State House he did, and in fact he did a 180 on that. We've called him out on that on this program. We've questioned him about that very thing. But the question is to you, which Republican running right now can beat him? Do you see any candidates that you think can be victorious?
Again, I think we're going to have a Republican governor. I look forward to working with the nominee and getting to know the nominees, or getting to know the potential nominees that are running, and those who may yet have announced that they intend to run.
A not so strong endorsement of the current field, it sounds like.
No, I don't put words into my mouth.
Well, I asked if you saw any winners, and I don't hear a yes.
I said we could. We'll see how the campaign plays out over the next few months. And I do believe, whether or not it's a current crop of candidates or anybody else who may jump in, that we will have a Republican governor. And I look forward to campaigning with whomever that is once the primary ends.
All right, Congressman Davis, thanks for joining us from Capitol Hill. We look forward to talking to you again soon. And should you have a primary opponent, perhaps a debate in your near future. Who knows?
Well, good to see you again, Mark.
All right, we'll be back in just a moment.